Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian, and today we are doing another cEDH experienced player breaks down gameplay video. So just a reminder for those who haven't seen my first one of these where I reviewed a video from Play to Win. In this series, will go and break down some gameplay from other cEDH content creators. Now, the point of this video is not to critique the players, make any sort of attacks on the people in these games, make any sort of negative commentary about the quality of the content itself, but to take these examples sort of like a case study and go over things that happened during the gameplay and from an optimization standpoint, say where certain aspects of the gameplay could have improved, where certain aspects of gameplay could obviously lead to certain players losing. Now, Playing with Power is really great because they show the opening hands of the players, so that gives us even more information to analyze while we're watching these games. The whole point of these videos is mostly for educational purposes, obviously a little bit of entertainment too, but I hope you guys enjoy these, and without any further ado, we are going to watch a great episode featuring Charles, who is not only a patron of Playing with Power, but a patron of Comedian MTG as well, and an awesome person that I've gotten to work with a bunch, someone who participated in the MLC with me, also known as the Mono White Guy or Evaldi in a lot of places on social media, and just someone who's super knowledgeable about Magic in general. So you should check out Charles if you have that time. I'll leave his information in the description down below. And I'll link this specific video in the description down below so you can watch the original. I say we just jump right into it.
Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Charles piloting Heliod, God of the Sun.
So if you pay attention here, obviously this is Heliod, God of the Sun, which is not traditionally the Heliod played in cEDH, but Charles has been playing this deck for a really long time. I played against it, and it is surprisingly powerful. It feels like in a video game how certain characters get like unique weapons specifically for that character. That's what this Heliod deck feels like with Charles.
This is a stacks deck that looks to lock out opponents and then send in the combat beats for the win. His opening hand contains 2 snow-covered plains, Flagstones of Trocaire, Ethersworn Canonist, Aven Mind Sensor, Archon of Emeria, and a Gideon of the Trials.
So I just want to break down this hand before we go into anything else. 3 lands, perfectly fine in a deck like this. Charles is definitely known for keeping these hands, and to be clear, the deck doesn't play a ton of fast mana because it's like a traditional stacks deck where you are really just trying to lock everybody out of the game before you go and do anything. And usually the win condition is like Heliod creating 2/1 creatures with vigilance, right? So you're not going to see a lot of fast mana in this deck, but the ability to have Ethersworn Canonist there is really good, locking down your opponents as early as turn 2, following that up with either an Archon of Emeria, one of the best stacks creatures to be printed, just period, and Aven Mind Sensor, a great card. It's a pretty decent hand, and yes, it doesn't do anything turn 1, but apart from Silas at the table, turn 1 isn't the most scary, and obviously being on the play, you're going to get your stacks pieces down as soon as possible turn 2. Gideon of the Trials is a pretty interesting include in here. It was a piece that people were teching in specifically during the flash meta because it basically said 3 mana shut off your opponent's flash. It has the 0 ability where it gives you an emblem that says as long as you control a Gideon, your opponents can't win, you can't lose. So when you're playing a format like cEDH where there is a lot of combos that really don't care about combat, that are avoiding the combat step entirely, Gideon is kind of powerful in that way because it allows you to basically stop anything that is combat agnostic and makes your opponents need to attack Gideon if they want to win with one of those combat agnostic combos.
Next, we have Zach piloting the partner pair of Kodama of the East Tree and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces.
So Kodama Sakashima, it's a very powerful combination in the fact that it just does everything you need in the command zone, except for draws more cards, right? But that's kind of what the rest of the deck is just ability, or is just ways for you to just continue doing that nonsense. And that being said, this opening hand that's coming up here is kind of the reason why I don't like it there, is because it doesn't fulfill the role that Kodama and Sakashima need you to.
This is a proactive deck that uses the frankly disgusting synergy between having 2 different Kodamas.
It's a very powerful deck, and it's very easy to underestimate it.
It contains a Mana Crypt, Breeding Pool, Exploration, War Room, Homeward Path, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, and a Force of Will.
Yeah, so the reason I'm a little hesitant about this hand is because of the fact that Yeah, it has a lot of ramp to it, but it's not casting either of your commanders in a way that you want to cast them, right? So you can cast an early Sakashima, but it doesn't do anything unless you have Kodama on the battlefield. So turn 1, you get to play that Crypt, right? You get to play Breeding Pool into Exploration, and then you get to play one of these colorless lands, right? But if you're not drawing a second green source, you're not doing anything with this hand. My other big problem with this hand is, apart from War Room obviously lets you draw a card for a big mana investment, and then Kinnan, which you don't have the mana to really take advantage of right now. This hand doesn't do anything, even if you go Kodama and then play Sakashima, right? So you get to cast up to a 6-drop for free. You put in Kinnan for free. Kinnan's already like a really cheap threat, so this hand having no draw payoff, no tutor payoff, nothing like that, makes me think it's really just not going to go anywhere. And yes, as I said, the War Room is there, so like you can look at it as a draw payoff, but it's a very, very slow one, and you're at a table with a Stacks deck and Rog Silas and Orvar. And Rog Silas and Orvar both have the potential to combo off very, very, very fast. They are very quick decks if they are left uninhibited. So this hand having a Force of Will is nice, but then just it doesn't feel like the type of hand you can dirtle with. So I assume this keep is based off the fact that Charles is playing Heliod, and that relying on one player that aggressively is kind of dangerous for these opening hands.
Exploration, War Room, Homeward Path,
Right.
Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, and a Force of Will. After that, we have Ryan piloting the partner pair of Rograk, Son of Roga, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept.
So apart from obviously Charles being here playing Heliod, this is one of the reasons I picked this game. Rog Silas, obviously one of the best decks in the format right now, the fastest deck in the format right now, pretty much hands down. And it's a deck that I have a lot of experience with. I top forward the Marchesa 2021 tournament with it. I was part of the collaborative Rog Silas primer that I'm not sure ever got submitted to the database, but there's probably about 20 of us working on that in the Grixis Mean Girls Discord. So Rog Silas is something I have a lot of experience with. I'm probably going to play it at a tournament again sometime soon. I'm definitely very comfortable with this deck, and it's a deck that is easy to have nut hands with, but hard to play right during most games. Mulligans are super important for it.
This is a turbo ad nauseum deck that is all in on speed. His opening hand contains a Badlands, Talisman of Creativity, Dockside Extortionist, Culling the Weak, Paradise Mantle, Demonic Consultation, and a Flusterstorm.
Okay, so a couple things about this hand. First of all, I believe Ryan is just playing Nadix's stock list, which is like the first one on the DB. There's a couple things I respect but don't agree with in his list. Cards like Paradise Mantle being one of them. Nadix tends to like to keep his Rograk around a lot more, and I am in the camp that like Rograk is really good when you can sacrifice it and go for speed. I guess I should say the benefit of Rog Silas, as I mentioned, it's the fastest deck, like just period in the format right now. It is very, 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 very fast. And Rograk allows you to make a ridiculous amount of mana very early. So when you see a hand like this, you go, oh, well, I can make like 7 mana right away. But this is a 7, and you're keeping a 7 based on the hope that you can use Demonic Consultation to go find you something. To me, that's really sketch. I know there's many people out there who will rely on Demonic Consultation more than others. I don't rely on Consult unless I have to. So when I see a 7 like this, I don't feel like I need to go get Consult there, right? I don't feel like that is my obligation here to go use Demonic Consultation to grab something. Now the rest of the hand's decent. As I said, it makes a ton of mana, but Consult being your only tutor, your only way to get any sort of card advantage at all in this hand is very suspect, and I would almost never keep a hand like this. Now, maybe if I'm down to something like 5 cards and I put Talisman of Creativity and maybe, I don't think you put Paradise Man at the bottom. I think you put like Talisman and Flusterstorm to the bottom, or even Dockside. No, probably don't put Dockside. But that is like an option that you have for that line. On a 7 here, I don't think you can keep hands like this and get paid off for it. Now, you're going to see in the game, Ryan does actually top deck an Imperial Seal. And if you switch out Demonic Consultation and Imperial Seal in this hand's absolutely snap keep amazing, right? But given just looking at these 7 cards, I would not keep this hand, and I think there's a lot of games, like a significant amount of games with this deck where you do absolutely nothing with this hand, or kill yourself with Consult, which is not great.
Finally, we have Mike piloting Orvar, the All-Form. This is a...
Now, for those who don't know, when Orvar first came out, there was, definitely a bunch of people in the community working on Orvar, but Mike really dove deep into this deck, so he knew a lot of the intricacies of it. He was very excited about its printing, and he's a very good pilot with it. I played against him at least once with it, and it's a scary deck in his hands.
the mono blue Storm deck that uses Orvar to use unique cards for spicy.
It's a very
chaos.
cool deck, too.
His opening hand contains an Ancient Tomb, 2 Snow-Covered Islands, Chrome Mox, Sapphire
This is
Medallion,
great, yeah.
Arkham's Astrolabe, and a Cyclonic Rift.
So
Without further ado, let's...
The benefit of something like Orvar is that you want to get Orvar down as soon as possible so you can start doing broken stuff with him. The biggest downside I see with this hand is the fact that you don't have anything to get you copies of Astrolabe right away, right? Astrolabe is really good in this deck because you can just play it and then it draws you cards, and then if you have something to copy stuff, you can make copies of Astrolabe and then just keep drawing from there. The pattern I see with this hand is definitely turn 1 Ancient Tomb into Sapphire Medallion, turn 2 get the Orvar out, which is awesome. That's like a really, really good way to start this game, and then you can definitely start doing stuff like playing Astrolabe. Hopefully you'll draw an instant or sorcery that can copy a permanent you have at that time, and then you can start really gaining just like tons and tons of card advantage from this point. So unlike the ROG Silas hand that I was talking about with Ryan, Orvar definitely has a lot more card quality and a lot more redundancy in the effects that you're looking for. And because of that, I would be much more comfortable keeping a hand like this with Orvar, where you have something to get you a card and then something that will like continually get you cards if you start hitting your redundant pieces. For ROG Silas, you need a tutor or like something like a Ristic Study to make that hand playable, right? So that's kind of the difference. Even though they're in theory similar hands, you also have interaction in the form of Psych Rift and stuff like that. So
Sapphire Medallion, Arkham's Astrolabe, and a Cyclonic Rift. Without further ado, let's begin this talented,
yeah, I'm excited to jump right into this
tirade.
one.
Charles wins virtual musical chairs and gets to start us off.
I
Charles
would
draws a
love
card
to
for
see
turn
virtual
and plays a
musical
flagship
chairs.
of Trocaire. He passes the turn. Zach draws a card for turn and plays a Breeding Pool, untapped, paying 2.
And now we see Zach doing the thing that we saw in the opening hand, where you just want to dump a ton of mana.
War Room as a second land for turn.
Unfortunately, you can't activate War Room on this first turn, which is definitely
Ryan draws
sad.
a card for turn and plays a Badlands. He casts his commander, Rograk, son of Roga. He casts a Paradise Mantle. He equips Paradise Mantle onto Rograk.
So one thing that I like to talk about with Paradise Mantle, and the reason I don't like it, is because, say with like Springleaf Drum in the early game, right? You pay 1 for the drum, you play Rograk, and then you can immediately tap the drum for mana. And that's why I don't like Paradise Mantle, because it's an equipment. So you give this ability to the creature, right? Which means Rograk can't use that mana right away. And there's just so many times where that comes up where it's very, very relevant. And because of that, Paradise Mantle just gets worse and worse the more you look at it, in my opinion.
He passes. Mike draws a card for turn and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Snowbird Island. He taps Ancient Tomb to cast Sapphire Medallion.
Yeah, the Mox Diamond definitely speeds up what
Plains.
Mike's doing
He
here.
casts another Sworn Canonist.
I wonder if the Chrome Mox was a typo in their hands and he actually had a Mox Diamond the whole time. Huh. That's an interesting thought. I'd have to ask Ryan about that later.
Passes. During his upkeep, Zach loses his Mana Crypt Flip and takes 3
Ouch.
damage.
Always bad.
He draws and plays a Homeward Path. He
Yep.
activates War Room, pays 2 life, and draws a card.
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about before with the desperation of like, all right, I'm going to spend my turn 2 in cEDH just activating a War Room. Not a great spot.
He passes the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts a Talisman of Creativity. He casts an Imperial Seal.
Yeah, so this is the Imperial Seal I was talking about. This Imperial Seal changes the entire course of the game for Ryan. If he has a console only there, this hand is just so much worse.
He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Everyone knows what Ryan tutored for.
It's so funny that he says this later, because he did fetch a Peer into the Abyss. We're going to find out in a bit. And I think most people would just assume it was an Oz.
And Ryan ends the turn. Mike draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island. He taps Ancient Tomb to cast his commander, Orvar, the All-Form.
Yep.
He casts an Arkham's Astrolabe.
So yeah, because it's a Mox Diamond and not a Chrome Mox, as they said, being able to get Orvar and the Astrolabe out on this turn, tempo-wise, is a really strong swing. And now all Mike really needs to like start popping off basically is some instants and sorceries that can start digging him.
It enters, and then Mike draws a card. He casts a Mana Crypt. He
And then
passes to Charles.
also more mana, why not?
Charles draws and plays a snow-covered plains. He moves the combat and attacks Zach with the Canonist. Zach takes it.
This really confused me. Going after Zach here instead of Ryan. Not only like did Ryan just tutor and you assume it's Nas on top, but Zach, I get Zach is like paying life into War Room, right? But the thing that I would think if I was Charles right now, the only reason I would ever make that attack specifically is how powerful Kodama Sakashima is at breaking parity against stacks decks. It is known as like a stacks buster deck, basically. So there are like a lot of decks right now that are counter meta decks, right? So we have the meta, which is like pretty aggressive ad nauseum-esque stuff. Then the counter meta, the anti-meta, which is stacks. And then there are two types of anti-meta stuff right now. There is the mid-range decks, right? The stuff like your Thrasios Tymna, your Thrasios Bruce Tarl, your Kenrith, these very grindy mid-range value decks. But there's also things like Paco and Halden, Kodama Sakashima, that just attack the format at angles that the stacks deck are not aiming at right now, right? If you're the stacks decks, you're aiming at ad nauseum, the most popular things. But if you're able to, say, win the game with a combo that doesn't require you to cast multiple spells per turn, and you're gaining value through a bunch of creature combos, and you're gaining a bunch of value by playing things for free that don't count as your cast per turn, like Kodama lets you do, those decks can be very threatening against white, very heavy stacks decks like Charles's. So that's the reason that I think that attack was made. However, Aethersworn being the only stacks piece out right now, we'll see what Charles does in the second main phase. Doesn't specifically mean that Ryan is like dead in the water. So I think he's really just trying to get these chips in now so that the late game tends to go to his favor.
And in his second main phase, Charles casts an Archon of Emeria.
Yeah, so really, if it is a Nas, right, I think he's thinking that he can really lock down Ryan right now.
Zach casts Force of Will, paying a life,
but
exiling a blue card.
Obviously, Archon is huge here. There are many combos in Kodama Sakashima that can win through these things. It doesn't mean that Zach sees them in hand right now. I am definitely curious as to what the thought process was here, especially given the fact that there's an Aethersworn Canonist. Yeah, it's an interesting play here, definitely. I would love to hear Zach's thought process on how that one came out. There are definitely combos in the deck that completely get blanked by an Archon. So it's definitely not like a ludicrous play or anything like that. It's just interesting to not like ride off the back of this for now, especially given the fact that Zach's not really doing much and is stuck like activating War Room per turn. You would think rule of law effects actually would probably be helpful in the way that Zach would want to catch up.
And countering the Archon, Charles ends his turn. During his upkeep, Zach loses his mana crypt flip and takes 3 damage.
rough damage reps here.
He casts a Lotus Petal. He casts his commander, Kodama of the East Tree.
Now, with this specific play, right, obviously Zach gets a bit lucky here, being able to go Lotus Petal, which works with the Aethersworn, into Kodama. But the problem still exists is that even with Kodama out, even with Kodama and then Sakashima out, Zach's still not doing anything right now in this board state.
Wander's Enclave. Kodama triggers, and Zach declines to put anything into play. Zach passes to Ryan. Ryan
Kind of funny seeing the 2 colorless draw lands.
And then Ryan creates 7 treasures. Ryan ends his turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike filters mana through Astrolabe to cast Clock Spinning, targeting Sapphire.
So I saw this play and was a bit confused as to why Sapphire Medallion was the target here. It starts to make sense later when you realize that the way Orvar kind of pops off is through a bunch of buyback loops.
Fire Medallion. Orvar triggers, and Mike creates a copy of Sapphire.
Now, meanwhile,
Medallion.
Clock Spinning does
Mike
go to the
wins his
graveyard
mana
because it
crypt flip.
didn't
He
get
draws
bought
and
back.
casts a Merchant Scroll. He fetches up a Whim of Volrath into his hand.
Yeah, so now you see Whim of Bullwrath, which basically the important part about it is that it targets something for only 1 blue mana and can be bought back for 2. But now there are 2 Sapphire Medallions onto the battlefield, meaning that Whims literally copies anything on the board and gets put back in hand for just a single blue mana. Or, sorry, anything on Mike's side of the board, to be clear.
He moves to combat and attacks Charles with Orvar. Charles takes it. Being shut off by Aethersworn Canonist, Mike passes. Charles draws and plays a snow-covered plain.
Now, being shut off by Canonist to go off this turn is definitely an important distinction, and there's definitely some nonsense that can happen. For example, like if you Whims targeting an island right now, you can just make infinite tapped islands to go to your next turn, and then you just have infinite mana, and then obviously you untap with infinite mana, and then you can draw the rest of your deck with the Astrolabe. So yeah, Mike is definitely being stopped from just kind of winning right now, but not to the point where he's in a bad spot, because you're going to be able to see he's going to be able to do this Whims of Volrath loop at the end of everybody's end step.
He casts an Expedition
He's going to be able to cast Winds of Volrath at everyone's end step.
map and ends his turn. During his upkeep, Zach wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and casts Spellseeker. It enters, and then Kodama and Spellseeker trigger. In response, Charles flashes in Aven Mind Sensor.
Yeah, this is a pretty rough hit from Zach, who's already very, very behind in this game. Charles definitely being able to capitalize upon the fact that Kodama Sakashima is really struggling. Spellseeker was definitely like the top deck that was going to rip him out of this, and it's rough to see him get hit with it.
Mind Sensor resolves. Zach
Just
looks
ouch.
at the top 4, fails to find, and shuffles.
Yep, the whiff hurts
Kodama's
too.
trigger resolves, and Zach puts a Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, onto the battlefield.
Yeah.
He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Kodama.
What stinks here is that Kinnan adds more mana with Mana Crypt, but then also doesn't add any more green or blue mana, so you can't even activate Kinnan at this point in the game.
Ryan chump blocks with Dockside. Zach ends the turn. Ryan draws and casts a Mox Opal. He passes the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike taps Ancient Tomb and overloads a Cyclone.
So we know Ryan Imperial sealed. As I said, we know that he got a Peer into the Abyss, just because I've seen the end of this game. So definitely showing a great deal of patience here. Obviously, Peer is much worse when there's an Aethersworn's Canonist on the battlefield. As I mentioned, I was very surprised that he didn't get Nas specifically because of reasons like this. If you're playing against a Rule of Law deck, going for Peer into the Abyss is a lot of the time just going to be so much worse. Now, if you want to be patient, like Ryan is being here, it isn't as bad. But the ability to, on the last person's end step, being Zach, or maybe even on Charles's end step, being able to throw out the Adnaz, and then maybe on Zach's turn being able to go, okay, I'm going to bounce one of your Rule of Law effects on Zach's turn, and that way you can untap with all your mana and the ability to go off. It's a very powerful ability, and one of the reasons that like Rule of Law effects don't just stop Adnaz decks, which a lot of people seem to have this misconception of. So that being said, I think I would have personally gone for Nas here in this pod, but I think Ryan was just trying to play around any sort of aggression that he would get as the Nas deck at the table.
Sonic Rift. In response, Zach activates Bonder's Enclave. He draws a card.
Yeah, so.
With Rifts still looming, Ryan responds by casting Flusterstorm with all copies.
Yeah, so this is a full Rift at this point, and Ryan kind of saves the table here.
Rift is countered, and the turn passes to Mike. During his upkeep, Mike loses his Mana Crypt flip.
See, that would be one of those great times where, and so yeah, Ryan's a little low on mana if that resolves, because obviously Dockside is dead, but if you had a Nas, it'd be like a pretty decent time to fire that off. Obviously, you lose some of the mana that you would have on your next turn to pop off with Nas. Just pointing out points where the Nas would have been probably able to sneak in under things, as opposed to the sorcery speed downside of Peer into the Abyss.
It takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a snow-covered island. He holds open mana and passes. Charles draws and plays a snow-covered plains. He casts his commander, Heliod, God of the Sun. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Mind Sensor and Ryan with the Canonist.
So Vigilance actually ends up being really important in games against this deck. I've just played enough games against Charles playing this where giving your creatures Vigilance is surprisingly important. And then obviously Heliod being a 5/6 is something that makes like trying to pressure the stacks deck very, very hard, especially a 5/6 that can just make chump blockers all the time. Kind of one of the main reasons that Heliod is able to sort of be this like all-in stacks deck.
They both take it, and Charles ends his turn. At the end of Charles' turn, Mike casts Whim of Volrath with buyback, targeting Astrolabe.
Yeah, so now we get to
Orvar
see the
triggers and
Astrolabe
creates
thing
a
I'm
copy of
talking about,
Astrolabe.
where we're just making
Astrolabe
copies of
enters, and Mike
Astrolabe on
draws.
end steps,
The
drawing
turn then moves to
cards,
Zach.
get to
During his
move on.
upkeep, Zach wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and activates Bonder's Enclave. He draws a card and then plays a Verdant Catacombs. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with everything.
Yeah, and you see Zach here is just doing a whole lot of nothing, right? A lot of the stuff we talked about in the opening hand, where you need something to be able to draw you some gas.
Ryan takes the hit, and Zach passes the turn.
Ryan's definitely getting
At
lumped
the end
here.
of Zach's turn, Mike casts Whim of Volrath with buyback, targeting Astrolabe. Orvar triggers and makes a copy of Astrolabe. Astrolabe triggers, and Mike draws. Ryan draws and plays a
Mike's
Spire of
definitely
Industry.
accruing like a ridiculous
He
amount of
casts his
value
commander,
here.
Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. Ryan ends the turn.
That's so that's what I like to call the point of desperation when we get to the point where we are casting Silas. Now, that being said, there's been games where there's certain variants of the deck that use Transmute Artifact to go get Bolas' Citadel. I don't believe this is one of them. And Silas is also very good in these sort of drawn-out games because Death Touch is very relevant when you're someone like Zach and you don't want to lose your Kodama, because casting that card for 8 sucks.
At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike casts Whim of Allwrath with buyback,
Yep,
targeting
and now
Astrolabe.
Mike's just
Orvar
running away with
triggers
it.
and makes a copy. Astrolabe triggers, and Mike draws. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and casts Sensei's Divining Top. He activates top, looks at the top 3, and rearranges.
Nice part
He
about
activates
top is that you get to look at the top 3, dig a little bit, find something you want, draw a card, and then doesn't count for your turn because Aether Sworn Canonist doesn't lock down artifacts.
Drawing a card and putting top on top. He plays a snow-covered island. He casts a Rhystic Study. Mike passes the...
So, for those of you who haven't played against Orvar, Rhystic Study is already a fantastic card in our format, automatic staple. It's so dumb in this deck. You're about to find out why.
Charles draws and casts Gideon of the Trials, paying the Rhystic tax. He plays the snow-covered plains. He activates Gideon's first ability.
Okay, so this really confused me because Charles upticks Gideon here and doesn't go for the emblem right away, and I legitimately have no idea why. The whole point of playing Gideon for me has always been you play it and immediately slam that emblem so you don't just lose to someone bouncing the right permanent at the right time. So this was pretty confusing for me.
Targeting Silas Wren. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Canonist and Aven Mind Sensor. Ryan takes it
And like, yeah, okay, you want to put pressure on Ryan's life total, and that's fine. You want to stop Silas from having Death Touch, and I guess maybe there was some sort of verbal deal between Zach and Charles about shutting off Silas so that you can put pressure on the life total. Not sure if that was the case, but I definitely still feel like the 0 is just so valuable in a pod like this.
and Charles passes the turn. At the end of Charles' turn, Zach cracks his Verdant Catacombs and pays a life. In response, Mike casts Whim of Allwrath with buyback, targeting Rhystic Study.
Yeah, this is where things
Orvar
get
triggers
insane.
And makes a copy
So
of Rhystic Study.
we have now 2
Zach
Rhystic
looks at the top
Studies.
4 of his library,
And you can do
fails
this
to
for
find again.
blue mana every
Turn
single
moves
time.
to
Just
Zach.
another Rhystic
During his
Study,
upkeep,
another
Zach
Rhystic
wins
Study.
his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. Kodama triggers, and in response, Zach activates Bonder's Enclave and draws a card. Kodama's trigger resolves, and Zach puts a Gyre Reach Sanitarium onto the battlefield.
So it's nice that he's
He
ramping,
pays 2
but
life to help cast Phyrexia Metamorph. Both Rhystic Studies trigger, and Mike draws 2 cards. Metamorph enters as a copy of Paradise Mantle. Zach equips Paradise Mantle.
I have no idea why this happened. He's starting to get more colored mana, which is nice. Yeah, I guess specifically for being able to activate Kinnan, it's pretty good, but that's really the only reason I could see it being a Paradise Mantle here. I just feel like there's other stuff in the battlefield that like have a chance to be a better payoff here, but I guess at the end of the day, you can't make another Spellseeker because there's still the Aven Mind Sensor, so Paradise Mantle, I guess, ends up being the best choice.
Mantle to Spellseeker. In response, Mike casts Whim of Allwrath with buyback, targeting Rhystic Study. Or
Yeah, I was very interested by Mike's choice of whimming after all of these cards had been cast. If I was Mike in this position and I was just gonna be making more and more Rhystic Studies, I think you do it on upkeep, where your opponents are a lot less likely to be casting their spells per turn.
Orvar triggers, and Mike makes a 3rd copy of Rhystic Study. The equip resolves, and Zach moves to combat.
3 Rhystic Studies
He
is so
attacks Ryan
silly.
with Kinnan. Ryan takes it, and Zach passes the turn. Ryan draws and casts a Lotus Petal. 3 Rhystics trigger, and Ryan pays for all of them. Right.
Not the least desperate play, but you know, you got to give the man respect.
And ends the turn. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike casts Whim of Allwrath with buyback, targeting Astrolabe. Orvar triggers and makes a copy of Astrolabe. Astrolabe triggers, and Mike draws. During his upkeep, Mike wins his Mana Crypt flip.
Now, I assume the pivot there to an Astrolabe was you are no longer about to go into opponent's turn, you're about to go in your own, and you want to get as many cards as possible in your hand for your own turn.
He draws and casts Sensei's Divining Top. He activates top, looks at the top 3, and rearranges. He plays the snow-covered island. He activates top, draws a card, and puts top on top. He casts an
Yeah, as I mentioned,
Archaeomancer.
top does a lot of work in
It
this game.
enters, and Mike returns Cyclonic Rift to his hand. Mike passes the turn. At the end,
I wonder if there's no other blue removal he's seeing in the top of his library at all, because Cycrift doesn't seem like the best removal to be getting here. Kind of want something more permanent so that you can like storm off with Canonist gone and then be able to like go off on your turn as opposed to like giving him the chance to replay it. But it's hard to say what's actually going to happen there.
At the end of Mike's turn, Charles cracks Expedition Map and fetches up a Strip Mine into his hand.
Also, for those who don't play the deck often, Archaeomancer is a very, very powerful card in that deck.
Charles draws and activates Gideon's first ability, targeting Orvar.
Yeah, once again, we're seeing upticks with Gideon, which I don't understand.
He plays a Strip Mine and moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Heliod and...
Very intuitive play here by Charles, grabbing that Strip Mine. I love forcing damage through here and then forcing Mike to basically overload the Cyclonic Rift now because you use the Strip Mine to go after your opponent's Ancient Tomb.
And Ryan with Aven Mind Sensor. Neither block and take the damage. At the end of the combat step, Charles sacrifices Strip Mine and targets Ancient Tomb.
And great to force someone to try and, if they're going to overload it, to try and force them to overload it during your turn so you can be the first to rebuild.
In response, Mike taps Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb is destroyed. Still in the combat step, Mike filters mana with Astrolabe and casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Ethersworn Canonist. Canonist bounces back to Charles' hand. Still in combat, Mike filters again and casts Whim of Volrath, targeting Snow-Covered Island. Orvar triggers and makes a copy. With Canonist gone, Mike presents a loop and creates exact...
So now we get to see what I was talking about earlier, where Mike can target one of his islands with Whims of Volrath, pay a blue, make a copy of the island, pay a blue, make a copy of the island. And now the copies come in untapped, right? So now you're able to make literally infinite islands, and then when you untap for your next turn, you can then make infinite copies of something that can draw you a card, like Arkham's Astrolabe. You can infinitely buy your stuff back with the Archaeomancer. It gets kind of insane.
Exactly 9,001 snow-covered islands tapped.
Very specific
He casts
number.
Whim of Volrath, targeting Archaeomancer. Orvar triggers and makes a copy. The copy enters, and Mike returns Cyclonic Rift to
Yeah,
his
good
hand.
to get Cycrift back
Charles
too.
finally gets to move to a second main phase. He casts another Sworn Canonist, paying for the Rhystic Studies. In response, Mike casts Whim of Volrath with buyback, targeting Astrolabe. Orvar triggers and makes a copy of Astrolabe. Astrolabe triggers and Mike draws. Mike casts Whim of Volrath again with buyback, targeting Astrolabe.
I think Mike is just digging for
Orvar
answers
triggers
here.
and makes another copy. Astrolabe triggers and Mike draws. Mike casts Pact of Negation, countering Canonist.
I don't know why Mike goes for this play, because you already have a Cycrift in hand. You used a bunch of mana to dig for more cards, and now with the Pact, you're forcing yourself to pay on upkeep, whereas with Cycrift, you could go for the Cycrift, and then if someone counters it, then you could use the Pact, or you could dig for something like a Pact. I don't know if he had Pact in hand. So I don't really know why he's going for countering this Canonist, especially in the face of Rog Silas, who we know hasn't been interacted with and hasn't used any of their resources really all game. So now that player has a Canonist-less board state with only really an Aven Mind Sensor stopping them from doing anything stacks-wise. So pacting this here, I think probably was not the right play.
Charles passes. At the end of Charles' turn, Zach cracks his Wooded Foothills, pays a life, and fetches up a... once again, fails to find. During his upkeep,
ouch.
Zach loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and activates Bonder's Enclave, drawing a card. He casts his other commander, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. The Rhystic's trigger, and Mike draws 3 cards. In response, Mike casts Cyclonic Rift, bouncing Kodama back to Zach's hand. Sakashima then enters as a copy of Spellseeker.
So with Kodama and Sakashima, for those who aren't familiar with the deck, they tend to pop off if left unencumbered at that point of the game, right? So once again, without the Canonist there and that deck being able to get just a free 6 or less cast for 0 mana, the deck tends to combo off usually around that point. Now, jumping on the Cyclonic Rift here when you have Kodama and you know your opponents haven't cast anything scary yet. So for something like counter magic, I think you interact with Sakashima. With something like a pinpoint removal spell like we have here with Cyclonic Rift, I'm not sure you go for removing Kodama this proactively. Now, Hisp is a great pilot of this deck, the one who came up with this deck, and I could easily see him telling me I'm wrong here about this play, but It's definitely a scary deck if you just kind of let it do its thing. So I can see kind of why Mike's firing the gun off here. But once again, now we have a Rock Silas player with no open mana, and they're just able to do their thing.
Spellseeker triggers, and Zach looks at the top 4 and fails to find. Bad break after another has kept Zach down, and he has to pass the turn. Ryan.
And as Ryan said there, it's kind of like bad break one after the other. But I think a lot of it just has to do with keeping an opening hand that just doesn't really do much in a game where you need to be able to outgrind your opponents in the face of a stacks deck.
Ryan draws and cracks treasures to cast Peer into the Abyss. The Rystic's trigger, and Mike draws 3 cards. Shockingly, it resolves.
This blew my mind when I was watching this game the first time, the fact that this Peer resolves. I have to assume Mike draws interaction after this point, because letting this resolve is definitely never the right call. And you'll see there's a fight in a bit over the win condition. So I have to assume that that's why that fight happened. I've had many players, let an ad nause resolve and then try to fight people afterwards. Not usually with the Peer into the Abyss, but even so, I think people try and get greedy with that, and it's just a proposition that will only ever pay off maybe like 3% of the time. So whenever your opponent puts one of these cards in the stack, ad nause, Peer into the Abyss, you should counter it.
Ryan loses half of his life and puts half of his deck, which is 42 cards, into
And once again, I don't think that's what Mike did here. I think Mike just drew interaction later.
his hand. He casts Winds of Rebuke, targeting Aven Mind Sensor. Rystic triggers, and Mike draws 3 cards. Aven Mind Sensor bounces
'Cause that's
to Charles'
three-
hand,
three
and
new
then
cards
each
right
player
now.
mills 2. Ryan plays a Volcanic Island. He casts a Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Rograk.
That's another
Rystic
3
triggers,
cards.
And Mike draws 3 more cards. Ryan fetches up a card into his hand, and then casts Thassa's Oracle. The Rystic's trigger, and Mike draws 3. Thoracle enters,
so
and
now
with
we
a
have
trigger
9
on the
new
stack,
cards.
Ryan casts Demonic Consultation.
And now we have 12 new
Rystic
cards.
triggers, and Mike
Right, so it's very easy to believe that Mike drew a bunch of free interaction off of the 12 cards that he just drew.
draws 3. In response, Mike casts Fierce Guardianship.
One thing I wanted to talk about with Ryan's choices here, it's very clear that Ryan either got Thassa's Oracle or Demonic Consultation. And there's something to be said for going for that line in the face of this Rhystic Study trio. One thing that I think may have helped in this circumstance is instead going for an Underworld Breach. Because you still have your Diabolic Intent in your graveyard, right? You can cast that again by playing another one of your creatures, and you have Silas written out on the battlefield. But Underworld Breach allows you to have access to all the spells that you've cast before this point. Now, obviously, if I'm Mike, I'm fighting over the Underworld Breach, right? And that's definitely a point to note here. But if the Breach resolves, now all the spells you're casting after Breach have the benefit of the backup of all the stuff that you've cast earlier in this game. If mana's tight, if you think that you're trying to get in there under the gun before Mike draws something free, this play makes a bit more sense, especially in the scenario where mana is actually pretty tight. So just interesting to note about the progression of the plays here and what to tutor for when you're in a situation like this.
Chip for its alternate cost. Ryan responds by casting Pact of Negation, targeting Fierce Guardianship. Rhystic triggers, and
Once
Mike
again,
draws 3.
Three cards
Mike
coming
responds
in.
by casting Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue
Yep.
card, and targeting Demonic Consultation.
Yeah, definitely a smart play here by Mike, targeting the initial spell and not the Pact. It's good to try and let the Pact resolve. Pact will counter for his guardianship, all that nonsense. Just very clean, optimal playing here.
Ryan responds again and taps Spire of Industry to cast Red Elemental Blast, targeting Force of Will. Rhystic triggers, and Mike draws 3 more cards. Unfortunately,
And if you're thinking like, oh, if I'm Ryan, why am I going for this at this point in the game? Well, 1, the stacks is all gone. 2, despite the fact that Mike has 3 Rhystic Studies, it's not going to get better from this point. If anything, it'll probably get worse. The other thing is, there's only so much free interaction your opponents can have, and you have to play around that. And having 2 pieces to protect your own win condition on top of that, it feels pretty safe here if I'm in Ryan's shoes to be going for this win. And as I said, it's never going to get better from this point. So
Mike is out of answers, and the stack resolves. Red Blast counters Force of Will, Pact of Negation counters Fierce Guardianship, and Demonic Consultation resolves. Ryan exiles his library. Thassa's Oracle trigger resolves, and Ryan wins the game.
So this was a great game. Loved watching it. One thing to note here, people are definitely going to be like, oh, it's a game that ends with Thassa's Oracle. And that's, as I mentioned, like there are many other lines you can get when you have half of your deck in your hand. So the game definitely ended with Peer into the Abyss, right? I just felt like bringing that point up because I know the Playing with Power guys get a lot of flack for having games end with Consultation and Thassa's Oracle, which I don't particularly understand, but it's a thing that happens. So thank you for watching this video. If you like stuff like this, feel free to like and subscribe. I mentioned that I had asked the audience last time whether this was some videos that people enjoyed, and a lot of people gave really positive feedback about that. Throw down below in the description other channels you want me to review. If you want me to review a specific game, feel free to link those down in the comments down below. I want to hear from you guys. What do you want me to use as a case study? I want to help you guys learn and watch these games and be able to learn and improve through the breakdown and analysis of these games. As I mentioned, everything said here today is out of a point of learning and not at a point of criticism of any of the individual players or plays, just meant to say what decision making sort of led to the events that happen in these games, how the thought processes of these players can be shown through what happens and transpires in the game, and just taking a bit of my experience in the format and allowing me to break down this information. If you like content like this, please feel free to like and subscribe. That helps the algorithm know that you guys enjoy this stuff. As I mentioned, comment down below on other stuff you guys want to see me do reviews of. If you really like content like this, please head over to patreon.com/comedianmtg. We have some amazing patrons. We have the most patrons we've ever had on the channel, and the support means so very much. And if you notice the crystal quality of the webcam I'm using right now, that is thanks to patron ZRob, who was so generous enough to get me a brand new webcam for recording and playing. And ZRob, I can't thank you enough. It's awesome, and I love this new camera. So huge shout out to you for making that happen. Oh, two more things of upkeep. This weekend, Saturday, I am in the finals for the MLC. We are in the Mox Bowl, as it's being called. Monarch Media, the group responsible for Oktoberfest, Marchesa tournaments, the biggest cEDH tournaments of all time, they are doing the coverage for this event. There's guests like Moderately Anonymous MTG, Sheldon Menery's coming in to be a guest spot at some point in the day, people from the Reflecting Pool, stuff like that. So there's a lot of attention coming around this, and it's a very exciting opportunity. It's something I'm very excited to be in the finals of, and I get to go first in the finals pods, so you can see me repping Paco and Halden in that pod. And last but not least, just a reminder, Tier 1 Con is around the corner. Come check out this amazing, amazing tournament. It's going to be the tournament of the year, if not tournament of like the next few years. A live in-person tournament in Denmark. I'm going to leave the description, all the information about that down in the description below. If 250 people show up for this tournament, a time twister is up for grabs for the top player. So it's insane. It's going to be a huge tournament. I'm so excited to be able to participate into it. I'm flying to Europe soon, so it's a pretty cool thing. And I'm definitely going to be doing a lot of content covering what happens during that event. I'm going to be going for sort of a vloggy feel, so we'll see how that comes out. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have an amazing week. Peace.